welcome to Loops by Lucia. My name is Lucia. This is my channel where I talk about knitting, crochet, and any other craft-related thing I happen to be into at the moment. Today I have knitting podcast number 2. I'm going to talk about a finished object that I have on me right now, a couple of new cast-ons, as well as some yarn that I have recently bought. So grab whatever is on your needles right now and let's get talking about some knits. Today we're going to start off with a finished object. It's the one that I have on right now. This is the Wooden Emony Pullover by Sari Nordlund. This is a top-down knit with an all-over lace pattern all over the yoke, and the gauge is 20 stitches to 28 rows on 4mm needles. There are 3 separate needle sizes throughout the pattern. There's a 3mm for any of the ribbing, the cuffs, or the end of the body. There's the 3.5mm for the lace itself, and then 4 for stockinette. I ended up needing to go up a full millimeter on each. So I used 4 for the ribbing, 4.5 for the lace, and 5 for the stockinette. The suggested positive ease is 2 to 6 inches, so I made myself the medium size, and I ended up with about 5 inches of positive ease. The suggested yarn for this pattern is a fingering held together with a lace. In the pattern, it's the Lanagato VIP held together with the Filcolana Tilia, but I chose to use one strand of DK, and that strand was Kelborn Woolen Scout in the colorway Moss Heather. It's a 100% wool, and I got it from Fiber Space in Alexandria, Virginia. The pattern features some short row shaping for the back, which I did end up doing, as well as some optional baubles, which I did not end up doing. There are a few modifications I did make to this pattern, the first being that the stockinette on the body is 8.25 inches in the pattern for sort of more of a cropped fit, but I wanted to have a super oversized comfy fit, so I ended up doing 12 inches of the stockinette instead of the 8.25. The other modification I made, which isn't really a modification, just a different way of doing it, was that the neckline wants you to knit together with the cast on for the folded double knit neckline, and I ended up just sewing it because I'm lazy. I am really in love with this sweater. I think it turned out beautifully. Do ignore these 2 little sort of bumps that I have. I have had it on a hanger for a little while. After drying it on the blocking mat, it was still a little bit damp, so I went ahead and put it on a hanger, and currently it's just sort of puffing out right there. Ignore it, it's not a problem with the knit at all. The thickness and the drape that I was able to achieve with the 5mm stockinette is just so gorgeous with this yarn. It feels like the perfect size needle for this yarn, not too tight, not too loose, and it just has this beautiful, lovely drape after blocking as well that I'm just absolutely loving. I will say something that I really loved about the blocking of this sweater was that before I blocked it, this lace was a lot more puffed out from when I was working on it, and by blocking I was able to get it a lot more of an even, smooth look. You see very little puffing out except where the detail is sort of supposed to be accentuated a little bit. So wet blocking in particular was, I think, a really good choice for this particular knit. Currently it's between 70 and 80 degrees every day here, and it's a little hot for this sweater, but very soon I am sure we're going to get some nice chilly weather, and I will be wearing this constantly. This is certainly going to become one of my new sweater fall staples in my wardrobe. So that was my one finished object for this podcast. Let's talk about some new cast-ons. The first new cast-on that I want to talk about today is the Home Sweater V-neck by Adria, and this is what I have so far. We've got the back panel done, we've got the front panels done and sewed together, and we are currently knitting in the round in stockinette. This is an oversized drop shoulder V-neck. It's worked top down in the front and back and connected up to the V-neck, which is the part that I'm currently on. And then I will come back and do the ribbed neckline as well as the sleeves. This is a DK weight knit with the gauge being 16 stitches to 25 rows on 5mm needles. I ended up needing to size up to 5.5mm needles in order to meet the gauge. The suggested positive ease for this pattern is 8 to 10 inches, and it's very oversized and cozy, and hopefully by me knitting the 3rd size in the pattern, I will be able to achieve the higher end of that positive ease. The suggested yarn for this pattern is Gregoria Fibers Cloud, which is a 42% alpaca, 30% cotton, and 28% wool yarn. It is no longer sold. So I ended up using the Essayer Soft. This is a 56% alpaca, 44% Pima cotton yarn, and I'm using the color 0E, which is just their light cream color. If you take a look at the yarn, you see that the cotton is sort of the real sort of meat of the yarn, and we've got those alpaca fibers blown all over to create that beautiful fuzz. At this point, I am currently 21 rows down the body. I've got about 40 more to go before I start finishing up with the rib of the body, and I'm very pleased with how this is turning out. I think it's turning out beautifully. I think that the fuzz of the alpaca really makes it look and feel just super cozy, and it just really lends itself to a very wintry, cozy fireplace couch vibe, which is exactly what I was looking for. I ended up buying 2 different yarns for this pattern because I initially bought the Essayer Eco Baby for this pattern, which was also cream color, but it had a little bit more of a tight chainette look to it. It still had a little bit of fuzz, but not quite the level I was looking for. So I got this Essayer Soft at Looped Yarn Works in Washington, DC, and this had exactly the fuzz that I was looking for. I think the blown fibers just make it look so unbelievably cozy. If you look closely, you'll see that I actually made a little bit of a mistake in the neckline with the increases. I think that I might have accidentally put 2 together too closely because I did end up having to spread out the last 3 increases at the bottom of the front piece. And I do think that this isn't going to be an issue. I do think that with the neckline ribbing, which is a very nice thick chunky rib, I do think that this is going to sort of even itself out and not be as visible. If not, then I'll go ahead and block it and try to make it a little bit more even of a neckline. I only really have had one issue so far with this yarn or this pattern, and it is an issue with the yarn, and it's just because of the amount of blown fiber there. Sometimes I will be working and I will get a little bit confused about whether all of the blown fibers that have sort of combined together on the needle are another stitch. It can look very, very thick on the needle, and I just had to keep a close eye on if it was actually another stitch or if it was just that blown fiber. And it hasn't created a massive issue, but there have been a couple of points where I've had to do a little bit of math and make sure that I wasn't accidentally adding on or decreasing a stitch by not knitting something that did look a little bit like a stitch. I have been working on making a project vlog for this. I have been filming just as I've been going through making this pattern, and so far so good. It's taking a little longer than I expected to work on the body just because it's a lot of stockinette, and I will feel like I've knit a lot more than I actually have, which is weird. Usually I end up working on the stockinette portion of the body of a sweater and it sort of flies by, but I think that the DK weight of this particular yarn for some reason is just making it take a little longer, and that's fine. It just means that I probably will need at least another month to finish this up, which will be right in time for when it gets nice and chilly and appropriate to wear this sweater. My second new cast on, and one that I am unbelievably excited to talk about, is the Moby Sweater by Petiteknit, and this is what I have so far. I'm trying to hold it so you can see sort of what's going on. This is the back, and I'm currently working on the front yoke. This is my absolute very first cabling pattern, and I'm so excited about how it is looking and turning out. It has been surprisingly easy to learn how to cable using this pattern, so thank you, Petiteknit, for your helpful videos on your website. This is a top-down drop shoulder sweater, and I'm gonna briefly talk about the actual design pattern itself. So what you have in the middle is some mock cabling to create this gorgeous little crisscross pattern. Then on each side, you just have some purl garter stitch, and then you sort of move over and you get into some pretty simple cable 8 cables here. And you can see that they are symmetrical, they are facing each other, and then on the side you have some double moss stitch, which I'm gonna talk about in a little bit because that was actually one of the tricky parts of this pattern. But that is the whole design, and it seems a lot more complicated than it actually is, and I've found myself really taking to this pattern while I've been working on it. This is a worsted weight pattern. In the pattern, it is DK plus lace held together. It is the Jensen by Isayer, which is 100% merino, and the soft silk mohair by Knitting for Olive. And I have been using the Cascade 220 by Cascade Yarns in the color Lavender. This is a 100% wool worsted weight yarn that I've got here. It's got a little bit of creativity within the purple. It's got a little bit of a blue. It kind of has almost an inky look, like some of those blue sort of spots almost look like a little bit of pen or something, just got a little bit of ink on it, and I actually really like the way that it looks. The gauge for this is 20 stitches to 28 rows on 4mm needles. I have had to size up to 5 in order to hit gauge. I am a very tight knitter, so I almost always have to end up sizing up a little bit. The suggested positive ease is 6 to 8 inches, and I am making the 3rd size in this pattern. As I mentioned, I am currently working on the front yoke. I have done very little of it. I went ahead and finished the left and right shoulder and just recently went ahead and connected in the middle. As you can see, I'm starting to create that mock cable pattern in the middle. I have to do about 40 more rows of this, and then I get to go ahead and work in the round for the whole sweater. Like I said, this is my very first cabling pattern, and I just am so in love with how complex it looks. I think that especially the cables themselves, I look at them and I'm like, wow, that looks like an extremely complicated thing to do, which is why I initially, for a long time, actually stayed away from doing cable patterns, because I thought those look so complicated, they must be impossible to make, and they're really not. They're actually extremely simple, and because they've been so easy and turned out so beautiful, it makes me want to pursue more complex cabling patterns. It makes me want to go and be like, well, I just finished a Sari Nordlund pattern. Maybe I can get my hands on another one of her like really elaborate cable patterns and see how I can make that turn out. The chart is extremely helpful. I do peek at it pretty occasionally just to make sure that my instinct for where I need to put the left crosses, right crosses, all that is correct. But I've found that I tend to be correct on instinct, so I've been looking at the chart less and less as I've been going. My hope is that as I continue working on this, I will be able to put it all in the round over the next couple of days. I've been very motivated to work on this because of just how intricate it is and how fabulous it looks. When I work on it, I usually do it in sets of 10 so that I can get a full round of the cable done, and then I can just start working down. And I find that that has been motivating me to work on the project a lot and to stick with the project for like several hours at a time, which is why this has worked up so quickly in like 2 weeks. This is all just 2 weeks of work. So the thing about the moss stitch that we have here is that the pattern calls it a double moss stitch, but Americans have to be very careful because it is not our double moss stitch. It is their version of the double moss stitch, which in reality is what we would call moss stitch. So I was very confused when I was working on the pattern initially, and I couldn't really find a clear answer as to what I was supposed to be doing. But this is a moss stitch with a 4-row repeat. So all that is doing a row of knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and then when I come back, I do the stitches as they appear, and then I switch on the 3rd row to a purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. Same thing, doing the stitches as they appear on the 4th row. So it's really a moss stitch with a 4-row repeat as opposed to a double moss 4-row repeat. I think they call it the double moss because you're doing 2 rows out at the same time that sort of look like they belong together as like a standard stockinette, and then you're switching it up 2 rows later. So I imagine that's why they call it the double moss stitch. I've also seen it referred to as the Irish moss stitch, but I'm not even gonna get into that because that's like a whole other like crazy rabbit hole of different types of moss stitches. But if you're in America, make sure that you are doing a moss stitch and that it is doubled into a 4-row repeat, and you will be just fine. I do want to touch on some projects that I have been continuing to work on. I haven't made a ton of progress, but I have made some progress on both, so I do want to talk about them. So the first one I have is the, this is not going to look like a cardigan, but it's the men's shawl collar cardigan by Jennifer Renaud. I have shown the full cardigan as it is currently worked up in my previous knitting podcast if you want to take a look, but here I am working on the second sleeve. This is an Aran weight cardigan. I am using Karen 1 pound in the color Kelly Green, which is a 100% acrylic. This is completed in front and back panels, and then you sort of create this collar shawl looking thing with buttons and button slots all the way through the middle. It sort of grows at the top, then you can add pockets if you want to, and then you go ahead and create the sleeves. And I haven't touched this project in a while, so I said, you know what, I don't know if this project will ever get done if I don't just start working on the second sleeve. And this is what I was able to get done yesterday. It is not a lot. This yarn is so stiff, and I just feel tightness and uncomfortability in my left hand while I'm working on it. To feel this pull against it, it just feels uncomfortable. So I can really only do a couple of rows at a time because it is that uncomfortable. That's not a problem with the pattern itself. It is truly just a problem with the yarn. And because the pattern is using a half double slip stitch and then slip stitch row to row repeat, it is working up a lot slower than the typical crochet pattern, because this is sort of made to look a little bit like an actual knit garment. But generally, if you heard the term half double, you would think that it will work up quite quickly. These do not work up quickly. These have taken me a very long time, and the whole sweater has taken me like 4 or 5 months at this point, because it's just been a slog to get through, and it's just been uncomfortable on my hands. But that all being said, I have started the second sleeve. I am almost done making the increases. I have, I think, 3 more sets of increases to do before I can start working on just the actual meat of the sleeve. And then once I finish that, I'm gonna have to do some decreases back to where I am here, and then I can sew it all together and finally be done with this cardigan and be able to give it to my lovely boyfriend, who has been very patient as I've been taking forever to work on this pattern. I also want to touch on the Adria by Joji Locatelli. I've been working on this for a while, and I have actually done some work on the body since last I saw you. I think I've done about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of the body. As you can see, I've got the lace panels growing here. They're looking quite nice. I'm very happy with them. This is a DK weight pattern. It has these lace panels down the sides, as I mentioned, and it has a 6-row increase that for a while I was having an admittedly challenging time memorizing. I would need to check the pattern basically every row to make sure that I was doing it correctly, especially when I got down to doing 2 separate symmetrical lace panels. I ended up, when I got down to combining in the body, I ended up having to really like take a good hard look at the pattern every single time that I worked these. But I am happy to say that I have now finally memorized the lace panel construction, and I've had to look at the pattern way less, just about once every 6 rows I've had to look at it. And it's made this a lot more casual and fun to knit, where I don't feel like I have to have my face in the pattern. And I'm very pleased with how they're looking and how the whole top is looking. Again, this is a summer knit, and at this point I don't feel a ton of motivation to finish it. I only really worked that many rows because I had a slow day at work, and it was the only project that I had in my purse, so I was able to get quite a bit done while waiting for something to happen at my job. And I am pleased that I got that amount done. I still don't know if I will be getting any more done on this until next spring or summer. But it's good to know that I have allowed this to be an active project for me. I don't love having projects sit around, and so to have the motivation to work even a little bit more on a pattern, I'll take it, you know? last thing that I want to talk about today is some yarn acquisitions that I've made, and I have one that has come here and one that I will talk about later that hasn't come in yet, but I do want to do a brief mention for. So the yarn that I do want to talk about today in detail is this wool of the Andes. This is by Knit Picks. This is their bulky weight wool of the Andes. It is a 137 yard to 100 gram yarn. It is a bulky weight yarn, clearly. It is 100% Peruvian Highland wool, and this is in the color Clarity. And I did buy this for a specific purpose, which is to use it on the Boyfriend Cable Pullover by Gail Bunn. It is a very elaborate cable pullover, similar to the Moby Sweater, but the pattern, being a Yarnspirations pattern, is only like 2 pages, so I wanted to do a more in-depth pattern before I went and used all my cable knowledge to do that more sort of pared down pattern. But as I was saying, this is a bulky weight yarn, and it is Highland wool. It's Peruvian Highland wool, but it doesn't feel as soft, as supple as a usual wool does for me. This really sort of has more of an acrylic feel, and I don't know if it's just that it's a bulky weight yarn and I'm just not used to the thickness of wool being this kind of weight, but it does feel pretty thick and pretty stiff. So I'm a little nervous to actually get my needles working with this, but I have 10 skeins of this now. I have a full sweater quantity, and you know, if not the boyfriend pullover, I'll find something for this to do. If not a sweater, maybe I'll throw together a hat or something. I don't know, maybe a good scarf. But I did buy this for a specific purpose, and even though it is relatively stiff, I am hoping to use it for that pullover. And then really quickly, I do want to touch on some more yarn that I do have coming in, even though it won't be coming in for quite a while. But that is yarn from the Sorella Eras collection number 2 that I just bought on pre-order. I've had my eye on Sorella's yarns for a very long time. They are quite expensive, so they're a little bit out of my budget for yarn. But when I saw that she was doing a revamp of her Eras Tour collection, I said, oh my gosh, I need to buy some of this yarn. This is my opportunity. I love Taylor Swift, and I'm so fascinated by these beautiful Sorella yarns. I've got to get my hands on them. So I did purchase 2 sock bundles of the Eras 2 collection yarn. I actually don't remember off the top of my head what colorways they were, but I will let you know when it does come in about 6 weeks. I have the intention to knit both my mom and I some socks. It will be my first time knitting socks, and I think that the colors that I chose, as I remember, are gorgeous and are going to create some beautiful, colorful, fun socks for the winter. And that is all that I have for you today for this knitting podcast. If you enjoyed what you saw, please consider subscribing to my channel and turning on the notification bell. It helps me out a lot. I have been so grateful to see the influx of subscribers recently, and if you really enjoyed my videos, maybe you'll consider sharing with your friends and hopefully growing our little community here on YouTube. I would love to see you all comment below as well, telling me about what you're currently working on. I'm always looking for new patterns to discover, and I would love to see what each of you have been working on as you've been watching this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.